This episode offers psychosocial education designed to inspire and motivate our listeners. The information provided does not constitute a therapeutic relationship nor a substitute for professional mental health care. If you are experiencing a mental health crisis, call 911, go to your nearest emergency room, or for listeners in the United States, text 988 for the National Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. Warning, this episode contains brain food that will lead to improved emotional and social intelligence. Thanks for tuning in to Harvesting Happiness today for a healthy serving of consciously prepared brain food. This is Lisa Cypers Kamen, your host. Since 2010, we've been broadcasting sound ideas for better well-being. Each week, we spotlight diverse thinkers and doers who are contemporary trendsetters and change agents, devoting their lives to creating a better world. I invite you to listen and change how you think about human happiness. Our award-winning content is fresh, optimistic, and purpose-driven media that promotes well-being from the inside out. This episode is part of the Good Citizens Election Season Survival Guide to Restoring Common Sense and Sanity in a Crazy World, produced in collaboration with renowned, fair-minded subject matter experts who provide strategies that enhance critical thinking, increase civic engagement, and foster healthy pleasure to boost personal well-being and relationship satisfaction. You can also discover more unique bonus content at More Mental Fitness by Harvesting Happiness on Substack and Medium. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. Thanks for joining me on today's show, where we are exploring freedom of thought, finding emotional sanity amidst chaos. My guest today is Dr. Andy Norman. He is the award-winning author of Mental Immunity, Infectious Ideas, Mind Parasites, and the Search for a Better Way to Think. Andy's research illuminates the evolutionary origins of human reasoning, the norms that make dialogue fruitful, and the workings of the mind's immune system. Andy champions the emerging science of mental immunity as the antidote to disinformation, propaganda, hate, and division. He founded the Cognitive Immunology Research Collaborative, also known as CIRCE, a global think tank leading the effort to inoculate humanity against cognitive contagions. He's a friend, he's a fellow human who has shown up here today in this post-electoral world. And we've also been working on the Good Citizens Guide to the Election Season Survival. We are now going to have this conversation, which is taking place 3 weeks before the election, but obviously airing after the election. And we're coming together as basically two concerned citizens and friends who know a few things about like how to manage ourselves. And even as friends, we're both having a little bit of the jitters. So Andy Norman, join me in this conversation because it's not a conversation unless it's going two ways.
Yeah, absolutely. So we can be jittery together, huh?
Yeah. Here we are. You and I have done a fair amount of work to do our civic duty to get the word out that we need to vote, why it's important, to learn about the candidates, contribute to causes that really can make a difference in voter registration and outcome, people actually getting to the polls. And here we are in a neck and neck race with some scary unknowns. How are you doing?
Hanging in there, but sometimes I feel like by the skin of my teeth. It's I'm actually having to take a step back from. I feel like part of me feels like I need to be spending 24/7 on work to work on getting the vote out, and another part of me says if I don't take a little time to unwind and breathe deeply and gain some perspective, that I'm probably not much good for the world. So I'm trying to balance those, and I'm not sure I'm coming anywhere close to the right balance.
That's a good point about the self-care, like in an effort to self-regulate and manage our own emotions, whether it is joy or disappointment or fear. There is a lot of fear out there.
Yes.
For a lot of different reasons, right?
Absolutely. Well, and I think both of the major political parties are painting the other party as a as a very fearful, dangerous thing. And those narratives that are floating around have many people kind of thinking in semi-apocalyptic terms. And I can't help myself but feel the stakes are very high. But I'm trying not to let that morph into catastrophism of a kind that.
The fear of the apocalypse, what pops into my mind is, like toilet paper and water.
The essentials, yes.
Yeah, the essentials that is some reptilian response to how to prepare for something that we have absolutely no control over,
Just the other day, I found one of those plastic containers in the basement. It was our pandemic emergency supply kit that we threw together in the midst of the pandemic with, a lot of rice and dried lentils. And, the idea was to, if suddenly supply chain disruptions made food really hard to get for a long time, that was our thinking at the time. Now it seems kind of silly that we bought this stuff and stuck it in a container and left it in the basement. But
no, I'm a California girl, and the Red Cross in California, it does such a great job with disaster preparedness because of earthquakes that pretty much everybody I know has a 5-day supply of whatnots to get them through being able to operate on their own. But let's not go down that route because that's fear mongering. Let's go down the route of freedom, right? Because you and I talked about the importance of where the ultimate freedom resides for the individual. And you're a philosopher. So I would love for you to just take it from there.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about freedom lately because I think each of the two major parties claims that the other is a major threat to our freedoms. And, as a philosopher who's taught students for years to how to think about freedom, I'm realizing that the public debate is extremely superficial. And we tend to rely on very simplistic pictures of what freedom is, and that those pictures mislead us in lots of ways. So if it's all right, I'm going to float just a few thought experiments past you, a few examples, and you can tell me what you think of them.
Let's do it.
So a crude notion of freedom is the ability to do whatever you want. So imagine somebody who you turn him loose in the world and give him no rules or restrictions. He can do whatever he wants. That guy seems maximally free in some ways. But now imagine this person is an addict. And they're driven by their addiction to just pursue things that really don't help them. Is that person truly free? He does whatever he wants,
right?
But his wants have been hijacked by an addictive substance or something.
Yeah, right? And well, I think that's an ultimate human enslavement, actually.
And the philosophers I admire the most say that enslavement by our own emotions and passions is just as dangerous as enslavement by tyrants. And that if we don't take into account the possibility of self-enslavement, we end up being unfree in profound ways.
This is great. And it ties into the effectiveness of fear-mongering in the media and within the election campaign.
Yes.
And the necessity to, as you appropriately have taught us throughout the months, of inoculating ourselves against that contagion.
Yeah. So let me try one more thought experiment.
Please. I'm with you.
Then we can go to this. I mean, I want to come back to the fear mongering in stressful political times. But so compare two mice. You drop one mouse into a large room where he can wander around this very large room unimpeded. And compare that with a second mouse that you drop into a very small box and then close the lid. Which mouse is more free? What would you say?
Well, my guess, and it's just a guess, is the one that's in the smaller space because it knows the parameters of its range.
Oh, so you're getting way too philosophically deep for me here.
So less anxiety because it knows some boundaries. That's what I was thinking.
You bring up some interesting points here. I think if I had to choose between those being one of those mice or the other, I'd prefer to be in a large room where I have much more freedom of movement. My point here is just that image of being able to move around unimpeded and do whatever you want. That's kind of our go-to picture of what freedom is. And so the first mouse seems more free, even if he's also more anxious, perhaps. Right. But now compare a third mouse who can roam the entire world unimpeded, but he's got electrodes planted in his brain that determine what he wants.
Mm.
And then some scientist is like sitting down looking at this mouse saying, okay, now I want you to turn left, pushes a button and the mouse turns left. Now I want you to go seek food, pushes a button and go seek food. This mouse doesn't seem free at all, right?
Yeah.
Because his desires are being manipulated. So now scale that up to human beings. So people have a long history of manipulating one another's emotions. Smartphones are pretty.
Yes, we're holding our phones up here.
Yeah, exactly. Well, when we all started wandering around with smartphones in our pockets just less than 20 years ago, we gave distant people the chance to hack into our minds and control us in ways that we only dimly perceive. Now, when somebody uses fear to make you vote a certain way, that's not exactly like having electrodes planted in your brain. It's not like a mad scientist is telling you exactly what you have to do, but it is a similar kind of mind hacking. And we need to be
Yes.
aware of it so that we don't just become pawns of larger forces.
Excellent point. And the other part of the equation, too, about the smartphone or the electrodes or however we're using the metaphor, is behind that is something that is, I think, a little bit sinister personally. And
Yeah.
that is about what ultimately is about consumerism, about advertising and guiding the public to get addicted to the crack of whatever news or information it chooses to. And
Yeah.
behind that is trying to push the crack of consumerism, of stuff.
Yeah. Our consumer culture today goes a long way towards indulging whatever wants we have and thereby empowering the want monster in each and every one of us. So Plato was one of my favorite philosophers, and he basically said, he gave a metaphor. He said that there are three parts to the human soul. There's reason, which is like there's the love of honor and glory, which is kind of like there's reason, which is kind of like the person you want to lead your society. You want reason to lead your mind, just
Oh,
as you
yes.
want a wise person to lead our society. You got people who crave honor and glory, and they're suited to be sort of the soldiers. And then you've got the people who are just slaves to their own desires. And in the last type, Plato says, desire becomes like a multi-headed hydra, a beast that just keeps sprouting new heads and new desires. If you don't ever try to tame your desires, they can grow out of control and end up overpowering your capacity for reason. That was Plato's point. I didn't say that very well.
Point well taken. And I think it ties into this theme of the freedom of thought or rethinking freedom, because many of us are going to be in a state of disappointment and angst when listening to this.
Yes.
We don't know which group it will be, but it guaranteed there will be a group.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, maybe the call to action is to circle the wagons and rethink one's own definition of what it means to be free. Because if the politicians are right, like we're doomed either way. Like no matter who wins this election, like there's a sense of doom that life as we know it is going to change, and certain aspects of it will change, right? Because that's the only constant is change.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I think we're all getting swept up in stories that can take on a life of their own, and right now they're semi-apocalyptic stories, and some of these stories have the potential to cause a very significant fraction of America to deny that their preferred candidate really lost.
Yeah.
Right. So there's evidence now that Trump plans to declare victory on the night of November
no matter what.
5th, no matter what.
Oh,
got it. And he's got, I think, lawyers lined up to file lawsuits in all the swing states. And so chances are we won't get a clean resolution on November 5th. And there will be lots of anger and fear and recrimination. And I'm really hoping it doesn't lead to physical violence. But it's certainly when your readers are listening to this, we might be in the midst of that.
We might be in the midst of the chaos.
Yeah.
let's take a pause and then we will come back and continue with that theme about managing ourselves in the eye of the storm, in the midst of chaos.
Love it.
Let's do that. Let's take a break. To connect with Andy, please do so at andynorman.org. You can find him on Twitter at Dr. Andy No, on Facebook, Andy Norman Author, and on LinkedIn, he's over at Andy Norman. Let's take that pause. We'll be right back. Harvesting Happiness is rooted in science. Our work facilitates applied positive psychology practices through media and consulting. We're committed to sound ideas for better well-being, leading to increased life satisfaction and a better world for everyone. We're not into pseudoscience or quick fixes. We're focused on common sense backed by rigorous research. Healthy critical thinking is the foundation for our discussions. We encourage you to challenge preconceptions and explore ideas with a curiously discerning mind. Collaboration with our guests is united by an inclusive vision to boost resilience, critical thinking, communication, and problem solving through civilized discourse and pleasurable relational engagement for everyone. Each day, we have the intellectual freedom to be happy or the liberty to be miserable, regardless of external circumstances. If you or someone you know is struggling with mental health, please seek support because good psychological health is vital to the achievement of a healthy and satisfying life. Visit harvestinghappiness.com for psychosocial and educational services that boost emotional and social intelligence. And we're back. Let's rejoin my conversation with Dr. Andy Norman as we continue talking about freedom of thought, finding emotional sanity amidst chaos. Okay, Andy, you and I are just talking now as two friends in our capacity as human beings. Mm-hmm. In the eye of the storm with all the rest of America. It's January. We don't know the outcome because we're talking 3 weeks before the election. How, from a philosophical point of view, can we restore equanimity within ourselves during chaos when there may be real disruptions out there right now that have disrupted our daily life, actually?
Yeah. Well, so the how question is a really important one, and it's a hard one, and I want to speak to that in a minute. But let me just take a minute to try to enhance people's motivation to achieve equanimity. Think about how James Bond is unflappable in moments of enormous stress.
Yes.
Audiences have admired that persona for years because there's something deep about it. So I'm remembering a moment in one of, I think, Pierce Brosnan's James Bond films where he's standing at a corner with bullets whizzing by, and one of the bullets hits the corner right near him, and Pierce Brosnan flinches a little bit, but he regains control of his body and his senses in just a fraction of a second. And it's a really powerful moment because his command, his composure, his ability to stay unflappable under enormous pressure is on display there in a really vivid way. And I've always wanted to be that level of unflappable myself.
If only.
If only, right. I'm not by any means, but I do try to reduce my flappability, and I made maybe some modest headway. I think the number one thing to realize is that we're almost never being the best version of ourselves if we just react to emotional stimuli. Our best selves come out when we pause, take a deep breath, step back from our emotions, and reflect. So reflect before you react, or instead of reacting, is a good formula for becoming less reactive, less flappable, less triggerable.
That's a good point.
Takes emotional self-control, right? It's hard to take a deep breath and regain your composure as there are bullets whizzing by.
As you're speaking, what comes to mind also is reframing the moment as an opportunity for learning. Like, okay, this feels like dog poop at the moment.
Okay.
But what can I learn? What can I learn from this moment about myself, about society?
Yeah.
And how can I turn it into an opportunity, as difficult as it might feel?
Yeah. So when you react, that's the part of your brain that sort of does the fight or flight thing that reacts to immediate threats.
Yeah.
But it doesn't bother to sort of store up information to become a better version of yourself in the future. There's two parts of the brain, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic takes over when we feel embattled or threatened, and it causes us, and it basically reroutes all the blood away from your higher brain function and prepares you to fight or
Yeah.
flee. Um, but if you can pause that process and say, wait a minute here, I'm not helping anything by just being reactive, by being allowing myself to be triggered. Besides, I don't want the world to just yank my strings and trigger me
Exactly.
left and right.
Then we give away
Um,
our power and our freedom. Going back
exactly.
to that theme again, right? That
There you go.
there we go. If we react and lose control of the only thing we actually can control, which is ourselves,
Yeah.
then we do give away the power. We do give away the freedom. So, like for me, one of the things I'm thinking about is how I'm going to reach out to people who have a different set of beliefs than myself, regardless of the outcome in
Yes.
the days after the election, to repair and reconnect
Yes.
after like 10 fragmented, really rough years. Like, one thing I think I have gotten to the point where it's like, enough of this. Like, this is just ridiculous
Hmm.
because we're not that different.
Yeah, that's right. But there are people who benefit from driving wedges between us and who are trying to get us to see each other as not just different, but enemies of the state, or
Yes.
in fact, words like vermin are coming back into
Oof.
political discourse in ways that are really scary to me. We've got people who are demonizing others as less than human. And we know from history that that leads to a very, very dark place.
Yes. I mean, that goes to Staya House,
Mm-hmm.
his research on witchcraft and how it fits into political rhetoric. There's another gentleman that I interviewed in this part of this series. His name is Philip Stevens, and he was at the University of Buffalo, and he has researched witchcraft and sorcery for like 50 years in the
Mm,
political arena. And I've connected the two of them, by the way.
nice.
Um,
Excellent.
but yes, these words do matter. And when we try to suppress or dehumanize or put the other down, we actually give away part of our own humanity in that
Yeah.
process.
And I think anybody who feels like they have to persecute witches has had their mind hacked.
Yeah.
Are no longer free. In fact, there's a recent article in Aeon magazine about how witchcraft beliefs seem to hijack certain biases that are built into our minds. So witchcraft, fears of witches crop up again and again through human history because they exploit weaknesses in our cognitive architecture.
Oof.
And of course, if you let false ideas exploit your cognitive architecture and fear things and go out and persecute people, you're not free. And you're not certainly not part of the solution. You're part of the problem.
Which leads me to scapegoating and why scapegoating is almost like a chill pill, right? As part of othering, right? Like if
Yeah.
I'm scapegoating somebody else, I'm letting myself off the hook for having a role or some sense of responsibility in
Mhm.
the narrative, in the story.
If there's a
Yes.
passing element to scapegoating, it's like you point fingers at others rather than sort of take shared responsibility for the problems that we have together. I mean, our nation has problems, right?
Yeah.
I certainly sympathize with people who are disgusted with the state of American politics. There's lots to be disgusted about, but saying it all sucks, burn it all down, that is not going to help us get to a better
No.
place.
And one thing that I'm really hopeful about, this is the silver lining for me in all these months of working on, like, we worked on mental immunity project stuff together. We've worked on the Good Citizens Guide together, is about
Mhm.
what's being done at the local level. That
Yeah.
state and local governments are doing incredible work And that, to me, has been very eye-opening and very comforting. Like, we may not like the person who is going to be in the Oval Office, but life is going to go on.
In one form or another.
In one form or another, yeah.
Well, I mean, and there have been episodes in human history where nutty, dehumanizing thinking have gotten so out of control that for a lot of people, life didn't go on, right?
Good point. Yes.
I mean, yes, the world will go on. Many human beings will continue to exist, but how much pain, how much suffering, how much damage might happen as a result of civic unrest in the wake of this recent, I'll use recent, even though it's still in the future for you and me at the moment. I mean, and all of us as Americans in the wake of a contentious election have a role to play in helping to kind of calm the emotions that might otherwise rip our country apart. We have to be less reactive. We have to take responsibility for being more. And the neat thing about that is, so you think that taking on responsibility limits your freedom because you're taking on a burden, right? A burden. But actually, taking responsibility to modulate your own emotions and not be triggerable is freeing. It feels like it feels like it steals your freedom, but it might look from the outside like it would diminish your freedom, but in fact, it's incredibly freeing to take responsibility and to at least control your own emotions, your own desires, so that you're a force for good. That is the ultimate. According to some of the deepest philosophers who've ever thought about freedom, learning to follow reason wherever it leads is ultimately freeing. Even though you're letting reason tell you what to do, but it's actually freeing. It's way more freeing than letting your desires tell you what to do.
Oof, that is a perfect note to end this episode on. We're going to continue the conversation over on More Mental Fitness on Substack and Medium. To learn more about Andy Norman and his fabulous work, as well as his book, Mental Immunity, Infectious Ideas, Mind Parasites, and the Search for a Better Way to Think, please head over to andynorman.org, on Twitter at Dr. Andy No, Facebook, Andy Norman Author, and on LinkedIn, you can also find him at Andy Norman. I love this conversation about the freedom of thought, and we're going to continue it. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thanks for joining us today on Harvesting Happiness. This is Lisa Cypers Kamen on behalf of my guest, Andy Norman, wishing you kind thoughts, kinder words, and the kindest of actions. Until next time, remember, happiness is an inside job. Happiness is your inside job. Please go out and rock your day and remember to be kind to one another. Want to explore more sound ideas for better well-being? You can listen to part 2 of this conversation and the Good Citizens Election Season Survival Guide to Restoring Common Sense and Sanity in a Crazy World at More Mental Fitness by Harvesting Happiness on Substack and Medium. Subscribe, listen, and share hundreds of downloadable episodes wherever you get your podcasts. Connect with and follow us on most social media channels. To learn more about lifestyle management and mental fitness consulting services, please visit harvestinghappiness.com. Harvesting Happiness and More Mental Fitness are produced by Lisa Cypers Kamen, Andrea Mengele, Robin Boyd, Andrea Daly, and the excellent team at Podfly Productions, including Eric Begay, Kimberly Beck, and Alec Guess, in collaboration with TogiNet Radio, KBUU, RadioMalibu.net, and is available on PRX, the Public Radio Exchange.